All right. As you know, inspectors general are supposed to be apolitical, independent. But since coming into office, Donald Trump has fired or demoted at least 20 IGs. He's also slashed their staffs and their budgets, replacing them with allies, instead political folks. So instead of preventing and detecting fraud, waste, and abuse on their own agencies, many have focused their attention at the state level. Congressman Jared Huffman of California tells the New York Times it means the purpose of the Inspector General has been upended totally, adding you're not getting a meaningful independent review of government waste, fraud, and abuse. You're getting another politically weaponized tool for Donald Trump. Joining us, New York Times White House correspondent Luke Broadwater, MS Now legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. So, Luke, help us understand a little better about these IGs.
Right. So you'll remember when Donald Trump took office for his second term, he did mass firings of inspectors general. These are the independent watchdogs that are supposed to scrutinize different agencies within the federal government. They're supposed to be looking for fraud, waste, and abuse. They're supposed to be scrutinizing the department head and making sure dollars are spent wisely and there's not no-bid contracts going out to allies and cronies. And a lot of them were wiped out. And in their agencies, their offices were either left vacant or put temporary people in charge. Now what's happened is Donald Trump has started to appoint replacements at some of these agencies. But unlike past inspector generals who usually came from auditing backgrounds or law enforcement backgrounds or other apolitical roles, these people have overtly political backgrounds. So you have a former Republican congressman, for instance, or a lawyer who worked exclusively on Republican advocacy cases. Or in the latest example, you have one of the co-authors of the conservative Project 2025 document going in as an inspector general. And so what you see out of this is sometimes instead of looking inside the agency and scrutinizing the agency head, they're looking out at some of Donald Trump's rivals, right? Gavin Newsom, for instance, in California, or Letitia James, the Democratic Attorney General in New York. And so we're seeing a very different approach out of some inspector general's offices with these new appointees from Donald Trump.
So are there instances during this administration of cases that an inspector general would obviously be looking into? Is there something that they would have investigated immediately had they not been a political appointee?
Well, let's just look at the recent example of the reflecting pool, right? You had lawmakers call for an investigation into no-bid contracting, into allegations that resulted in criminal cases against citizens who then, by the time they were taken to court, were told that those were actually the facts of the case, that it was a contractor who caused these errors, not vandalism. That might be something under a previous administration that an inspector general would jump at, right, would start looking at. But in this case, Donald Trump, seeing those calls for this investigation, appoints a guy named Dennis Kirk, who's one of the co-authors of the Project 2025 document, to go into that office and essentially be in charge of any investigation that would come out, ensuring that an ally, someone who sees the world the same way that he does, would be in charge of such a probe. I will say there have been some examples within the administration of some independence from some of the inspectors general. I don't want to say every single one is going to do exactly Donald Trump's bidding every single time. But what we're seeing is a change in the approach to how this president approaches inspectors general from what past presidents did.
So if the inspectors general, in at least some cases, are not doing the investigating, are there legal avenues for others to open investigations, Barbara?
Not really. I mean, these are the kinds of internal investigations that we rely on the inspectors general to achieve. It's what's challenging about this is you don't know what you don't know. It is often inspectors general who get those inside whistleblower tips that things are amiss within their departments. And then that gives them the impetus to begin an investigation and can reveal wrongdoing in those agencies. You may remember that there was an investigation by the DOJ inspector general that discovered FISA abuses by the FBI that led to a lot of changes during the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, for example. Those are the kinds of things that really only insiders would be able to have access to. And without a robust inspector general system, it may be that these frauds are going undetected, uninvestigated, or that whistleblowers' complaints are going unheard. The IG Act was passed in 1978 as part of the post-Watergate reforms for good government, to have an independent watchdog embedded inside these agencies to be able to detect fraud, waste, and abuse. And it seems to me that President Trump is kind of doing an end run around that law by appointing loyalists who will at least be incentivized to look the other way.
So what can you get away with, Rick, without these inspectors general, excuse me?
Well, Katie, I think the lack of oversight from an inspector general function in any agency really reflects back on the Trump obsession with the unitary executive theory and with the obsession of absolute executive power. He would much rather be a king than be a president. And so he doesn't want accountability. He doesn't care about the impact to the taxpayers of fraud, waste, or abuse inside the government. As long as he's getting his cut, he's fine. As long as he gets his political outcomes, he's fine. None of these jobs were glamorous. None of these jobs were you don't wake up in the morning and go, wow, I can't wait to go be an IG and get more, internal reports from whistleblowers today. But they're vital in a government that has boundaries and norms and institutional rules, and that follows the rule of law, and that also understands that the purpose of a government agency is not merely to serve the president, but to serve the American people.
But I guess to put a finer point on it, you say Donald Trump wants to act as a unitary executive or something more akin to a king. Is this a indirect way of saying, I don't care if there's waste, correct, fraud, or abuse within the system? I mean, I came in with, Elon Musk and his chainsaw to fix up the waste, fraud, and abuse of the federal government, but that was all for show?
Yeah, that was purely performative. And we know now because, the $2 trillion Elon promised to save, it turns out to be about $2 billion. There's a lot of missing zeros in that equation. And he does not really care about whether government works for the people. He does not care whether it does its job. QED everything with HHS and other agencies. They don't care if they're doing the job to protect or serve the American people. He cares that they obey him. And so he wants as little friction as possible inside these organizations to make sure that there's no external check, no non-executive branch check on his power.
Barbara, do you think that helps explain what we heard from Todd Blanche over the weekend to Kristen Welker, that there is no independence, there can't be independence of the DOJ from the executive office?
Yes, this is another effort to cast the entire executive branch as one and the same as Donald Trump. And though it may be that the Constitution, especially the Supreme Court, which seems to have adopted this unitary executive theory, means that the president can do these things, it does not mean that he should do these things. And so since Watergate, we have had these norms in place that have made the Justice Department independent from the partisan politics of the president. And what Todd Blanche likes to do is to play a little bit of a semantic game and to suggest that independence means the president can't set priorities for the Justice Department, say immigration enforcement or national security or violent crime. That's absurd. Of course, the president can do that. But what the Constitution also requires is that the president take care that the laws be executed faithfully. And that can only be done if an attorney general and all of the people working at the Justice Department are deciding cases based on facts and law and the fair administration of justice, and not the partisan desires of the president who appointed them. And that's where independence is essentially important to maintaining the rule of law in this country.
Luke Broadwater, thank you for bringing us this reporting, and thank you for your legal and political analysis, Barbara and Rick. I appreciate it. Rick, don't go too far.